She had to hold her head on with one hand and her guts in the other hand. On December 18th, 1994, a 27-year-old girl by the name of Alison Botha is driving back to her apartment after a fun day out with her friends. She is living in Port Elizabeth, which is in South Africa, which is the same town that she was born in on September 22nd, 1967. The town Port Elizabeth has a population of about 900,000, and it's actually a very popular holiday destination in South Africa because of its beautiful beaches. This town has also been rated as South Africa's safest city, and people actually refer to it as the friendly city. Allison's parents, Brian and Claire, had split up early on in her childhood, which left Claire to raise Allison on her own, as well as her brother Neil, who was 18 months older than Allison. Other than the divorce, Allison had a fairly normal childhood, and she also attended an all-girls high school, which was also located in Port Elizabeth. Allison became the head girl at her school before she graduated, and after she graduated, she studied to be a secretary before she went abroad. Other than the divorce, Allison had a fairly normal childhood, and she also attended an all-girls high school, which was also located in Port Elizabeth. Allison became the head girl at her school, and after she graduated, she studied to be a secretary before going abroad, where she traveled around the world for 4 years. When she returned to Port Elizabeth, she began working as an insurance broker. So back to the night of December 18th, 1994, it's a Sunday, and Allison had just spent a fun day out at the beach with her friends. Her and her friends then decide to head to her apartment to hang out together a little while longer. One of her friends needs a ride home later that night, so Allison takes her home and she starts driving back to her apartment by herself. It is now about 1 a.m. As she pulls into her apartment complex. She realizes that her usual parking spot has been taken by someone else. She is not able to find another parking space in the parking lot, so she decides to drive a little out of the parking lot and she parks on the side of the road. As soon as she parks her car, a man with a knife forces his way into her car. The man orders Allison to move to a different seat by saying, "Move over or I will kill you." He now has her trapped inside of her own vehicle with his knife pressed up against her throat. He then starts driving her car and he tells her, "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to use your car for an hour." While they are driving, Allison and the man start talking with one another. Allison is doing this out of fear and to try and calm or persuade the man into letting her go. She lies to the man and tells him that her name is Susan and that she has a boyfriend who is waiting for her at home and is most likely worrying about her and where she is. The man tells Allison that his name is Clinton. She begs Clinton to let her go, and she promises him that she won't tell anyone who he is or what he's done, but he refuses to let her go. He tells her again that he doesn't want to hurt her. He then pulls the car over and another man enters the vehicle, which would turn out to be his accomplice. It is immediately clear to Allison that these two men have a very evil plan for her. The two men drive her to a deserted area on the outskirts of town to an area called Nordhoek. The men then tell Allison they are going to rape her. They ask her if she plans on resisting, and Allison is feeling completely helpless at this point, and she wants to do anything that she possibly can to save herself from this situation. After thinking about it for only a second, Allison responds and says, "No, I will not resist," as she knows that if she were to try and resist, then that will only jeopardize her safety even more. The two men then force Allison to remove her clothes. Then the man who said his name was Clinton forces her to perform orally on him. He then forcibly performs orally on her and then proceeds to SA her. Once he finishes, he tells the other man to go ahead. The other man takes his turn with Allison, and the entire time that he is on her, he has his hands wrapped around Allison's throat. This horrible act of violent SA causes Allison to lose consciousness. While she is unconscious, the two men take their knives and they cut her open. They then start to remove her intestines and proceed to stab her over 37 times in her abdomen and in her reproductive area. Allison is still alive at this point, so they decide to start slashing her throat in order to unalive her. They slash her throat a total of 17 times, which nearly decapitates her. Once they were done, one man asks the other if they think she's dead. The man responds, "Nobody could survive that." The two men get in their car, leaving Allison on the ground. They start driving away, and as they do, they throw her clothes out of her car window. Eventually, Allison regains her consciousness, and when she comes to, she realizes that she is naked, covered in blood and sand, in the middle of nowhere. Allison doesn't think she is going to live much longer. She is in so much pain and shock from this horrific incident. With that, what she believes to be her last moment, she uses what little energy she has left to start writing in the sand the names of her two attackers, which she was able to find out during the essay. This way, if she does die before being rescued, then whoever will find her body will see the names of these two men so that they could get caught and not be able to do this to another woman. The two names that she writes down are Franz and Tiens, which she was able to gather from the men as they were attacking her. After writing their names down, she also writes in the sand down below their names, "I love you, Mom," as her heart is breaking for her parents with the thought of them losing their little girl in such a horrific and sudden way. She then tries to catch her breath as she's lying there in the sand, wondering when she is going to pass away. She is losing tons of blood, and her energy is extremely low. After a little while passes, she realizes that she hasn't passed away yet, so she finds the will to keep moving. Thoughts of her family run through her mind as she knows that even if she dies trying, she is not going to give up without a fight. So with the very little energy that she has left, and despite the tremendous amount of pain she is in, she begins to slowly get up off the ground, and she starts trying to crawl toward the sound of the road. But she realizes that crawling isn't going to work for her in the condition that her body is in. So she gathers up her strength and stands up, but as she does, her head falls backwards. She is now facing straight up at the sky, and this is unbelievably painful for her. This is when she realizes that her head is barely attached to her neck. So to keep her head on and to be able to keep moving, she has to use her hands to keep her head on right, to prevent her head from literally falling backwards, which also risks her neck ripping even more, which would mean that she would be completely decapitated. So she's literally having to hold her head on her neck. She is in a daze, as you can imagine. She is very weary and also in a serious state of confusion, but she still knows that she has to keep walking. But as she is slowly moving along, she realizes that her intestines are not inside of her. She has to use one of her hands in order to push them back inside of her abdomen. Her intestines couldn't fit, and she knows she has to be gentle with them, so she's carrying them in her hand, pressing them up against her belly in order to keep moving along. So in one hand, she is holding her intestines in and up against her belly, and in the other hand, she is quite literally keeping her head onto her neck, which is barely still attached to her body. She comes across her clothes that had been thrown out of her car by the two men, so she picks up the denim shirt that she was wearing, and she uses it to help keep her organs and intestines from completely falling out of her abdomen. It was later determined that her windpipe was crushed during this time, which would have stopped her from being able to breathe, but the slashes on her throat did create an opening into her throat, which allowed air to come in and made it possible for her to continue breathing. She continues to use all of what little strength she has to keep moving forward and moving toward the road where she can hear cars driving. She cannot see anything at this point, and she also keeps slipping in and out of consciousness as she reaches the noisy road. As soon as she reaches the road, she collapses to the ground. Her energy has been completely used up, and she is beyond exhausted, and is also in an unbearable amount of pain. She cannot move her body any further. She is still going in and out of consciousness, and while she is lying on the side of the road, she's in her head just praying and hoping that someone pulls over and helps her. Eventually, a car does stop in front of her, and for a second she begins to feel panicked, as the thought of it being her two attackers frightens her nearly to death. But she knows that she has to take that risk of being found by the two attackers in order to get that slim chance of being rescued by someone else. It is about 2 a.m. now, and she can hear the car in front of her, and as she's lying there, she uses her strength to lift one of her hands into the air as if to signal to the car that she is alive, but really needs help. However, no one gets out of the car, and the car drives off. Perhaps the person who pulled over was too afraid to get out and see what was wrong with her. Maybe they thought it could be a trick and that they would be putting themselves in danger if they chose to get out of the car or something like that. Thankfully, though, a second car passes her around 2:45 a.m., so another 45 minutes goes by, and this car does stop. It's a young man, and he does decide to get out of the car to check on her. At this point, it had been about an hour and a half since she was abducted. And this young man tries to communicate with her, but she cannot speak because of her injuries. But her eyes are huge and are absolutely terrified, even though she can't see out of them. There are other people in the car with this young man, and one of them contacts emergency services to come and help her. Now, this is very fortunate because at this time in 1994, mobile phones were not a popular thing to have. Another fortunate thing, too, is that this young man who came out to check on her is a veterinary student, so he does have some medical knowledge and is actually able to push Allison's thyroid back inside of her body. He does whatever he can to help sustain her until emergency services can arrive. The young man knows that he has to keep Allison awake during this time. So he keeps giving her words of affirmation and does whatever he can think of to keep her alert. He is asking her questions, and because she cannot use her voice, she is squeezing his hand once for yes and twice for no. Him doing this is playing a huge role in her survival, as it does end up taking emergency services 4 phone calls and an hour and 45 minutes for them to finally arrive to the scene. And on the way to the hospital, the ambulance is actually driving kind of slowly. So much so that it prompts the young man to ask them to speed up because he knows that Allison is running out of time very quickly. It is like the emergency team did not have any hope or faith in Allison's survival, so they didn't see the point in trying to rush to get her or see the point in trying to rush to get her to the hospital. So the ambulance continues to drive slowly and does not have any sense of urgency the entire car ride there. Eventually, they do arrive to the hospital, and it is an absolute miracle that Allison is still alive at this point. They get her inside to a doctor, and the doctor states that her injuries are the worst that he has ever seen in his 16 years of practice. As he and the nurses begin to assess her, they realize that Allison has been completely disemboweled. There are big chunks of her small intestine lying on top of her belly, and inside of her belly, it is filled with beach sand and charcoal. They also realize that her uterus has been so brutally injured that she will most likely never be able to carry a child. The surgeon then comes in to operate on Allison, and he is absolutely shocked by her injuries and states that they are a striking act of cruelty. All of the doctors and nurses that are working on her are all in shock, not only by her injuries, but also by the fact that she has survived for this long. The medical team realizes that her thyroid, which has been pushed back inside her body by the young man, is actually cut in half. This, in any other instance, would absolutely be fatal, but by a miracle and the strength that Allison had in her will to survive is the reason that she is still alive at this point. The medical team also sees that her intestines have multiple holes and ruptures in them. And again, it's a miracle that all of these stab wounds missed all of her vital organs. So they begin to operate on her as soon as they possibly can, and while doing so, they also have to deep clean and sanitize each and every organ and every single part of her intestine to make sure that any particle of sand or charcoal is removed from inside of her. The deep cleaning and rearranging of her organs and intestines ends up taking 3 hours, and Allison is able to survive, which is just absolutely amazing. The medical team did such an incredible job, and they deserve so much credit for being able to restore her organs and save her life. They did such a great job that Allison was lucky to not suffer any type of infection after the surgery either. However, the surgery was so intrusive that Allison is still in jeopardy for weeks following the surgery. And not only that, but she remembers a ton of details of the attack. So this causes her to have mental and emotional problems. She is very, very traumatized. But the details that she is able to remember does help the police to identify and track down the two attackers. In less than 12 hours after her attack, she is awake and alert in her hospital bed, ready to give up the information that she had on the attackers. The police are able to identify the two men by bringing a bunch of pictures of the possible attackers to Allison in her hospital bed, which allows her to point them out as if they were in a lineup. One was by the name of Franz Dutoit, and the other was a man by the name of Tiens Kruger. The police are already aware of who these men are because they were both previously arrested for rape. Franz had been arrested twice before for the rape of 2 different women, and Tiens had been arrested once before for the rape of 1 woman. For some reason, these 2 men were out walking freely amongst the public, even though they were both awaiting their trials for rape, which obviously allowed them to gain another victim who they obviously intended on murdering viciously. So definitely a failure in the justice system there. These 2 men should not have been let out to freely gain another victim while awaiting their trials for something this serious. These 2 men didn't even have to pay bail to get out and be free either. They were literally just let go and were allowed to do whatever they wanted as they waited for their rape trials. Now, even though Allison had already written these guys' names in the sand where she was attacked, and she also identified them through their photos, she was told that it would help her case even more if she could verbally identify them. This is a problem because she cannot talk because of her injuries and because she has a ventilation tube that is providing oxygen to her lungs, and the doctors do not have any intention on removing these tubes so soon after the surgery because removing them could damage her damaged throat even more. But the doctors ask Allison what she would like to do. She agrees that it would be best to have the tubes removed so that she could talk to the officers. At this point, she is now able to verbally say that her attackers were in fact Franz and Tiens. Franz and Tiens are arrested on the 19th of December at 5 a.m., so just a little over 24 hours from when they attacked Allison. They were both charged with rape, kidnapping, as well as the attempted murder of Alison Botha. The media labels them as the Nordhoek Ripper rapists. When Franz is arrested by the police, he is genuinely confused as to why they are charging him with attempted murder, rather than just murder. He is so shocked to find out that Allison survived everything him and his accomplice had put her through. He then tells police that there is nothing that he can hide from them, as Allison will probably tell the police everything that happened. He then pulls out a blood-stained ring from his pocket and hands it over to the officer, stating that he had stolen it from Allison. The officers do test the DNA on the ring and are able to confirm that it did belong to Allison, just to ensure that there wasn't another victim that they didn't know about. It turns out that Franz and Tiens had raped a pregnant woman just 2 weeks before this incident, and Franz gave the officers the knife they used on the pregnant woman. They did not try to unalive the pregnant woman, however, they did threaten to kill her if she told the police. But the pregnant woman did go to the police immediately after this attack, despite the threat, which was the trial that they were waiting for, and this is how the police were already aware of these two men. On December 29th, both men are sentenced to do 30 days of psychiatric evaluation. Meanwhile, Allison has to go into medical treatment every single day to undergo more surgeries, as well as have her wounds treated. And every day, her abdomen injuries have to be scraped so that new cells could grow. And she also had to get a bunch of plastic surgeries as well. And to this day, she lives with pain and complications from all of the serious injuries that they inflicted upon her. The men went to court facing 8 different charges, including abduction, rape, attempted murder, and robbery, and they did plead guilty to all of the charges. On June 12, 1995, so 6 months later, the trial started, and at the time, it is the only thing that the media is talking about. To this day, it is still one of the most high-profile cases that has come out of South Africa. It is noted that Allison seems to be very strong and emotionally content during the court time. It is hard to judge how someone would react to such a traumatic event, but it seems like Allison is just in a shocked state due to everything that she went through. And during the trial, Franz states that he is a Satanist, and he tries to blame his horrendous actions on a demon that has been haunting and possessing him. He claims that this demon is an incubus who told him to rape these women. People naturally thought he was just trying to deflect the blame off of himself, but he does ask the officers if he could have an exorcism, so a pastor comes in and gives him an exorcism. During this exorcism, Franz states that there were 2 demons. One is an incubus and one is a succubus. This makes people really question whether, he is telling the truth about being possessed or not. However, this did not change his sentencing in any shape or form. So on August 7th, which is only 2 months after South Africa abolished the death penalty, which was in June of 1995, Franz is sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. He is given 1 life sentence for each woman he has raped, and Tiens is given 1 life sentence plus 25 years, 1 life sentence for Allison, and the 25 years for the woman that he had raped with Franz, the pregnant woman. After they are sentenced, they are split up to be held at 2 different prisons. Franz's father has since unalived himself because he couldn't face what his son had done. And on July 4th, 2023, so about a year ago, Franz du Toit and Tien Kruger ended up getting released from prison to be put on parole by the Department of Correctional Services with a total disregard for Allison's rights. The 2 violent monsters ended up only serving 28 years in prison. which is absolutely not long enough at all, and has left Allison to be absolutely and rightfully devastated. Allison has written a book and has done a ton of different public speeches as well as a documentary, and she has really helped to shine a light on how serious these kinds of perpetrators really are. Allison has also been able to give birth to 2 sons despite what the doctors had originally thought about her uterus and the condition it was in when she first arrived to the hospital that fateful night. And the young man, the veterinary student who saved her life, was also there during the delivery of her first son. It is absolutely disgusting that these 2 men have been released after only serving 28 years. I do pray that they do not harm any other woman or anyone else now that they are out. A 12-year-old kills younger cousin over an iPhone. On July 15, 2024, in Humboldt, Tennessee, a 12-year-old girl was revealed on a security camera murdering her younger 8-year-old cousin over an iPhone. The recording on the security camera shows the younger girl sleeping on the top bunk of a bunk bed when her older cousin begins to suffocate her using bedding. After suffocating the poor young girl to death, the 12-year-old then attempts to clean the crime scene by repositioning the little girl's body as if she were sitting up in bed. The victim's mother, Brianna Smith, identified her as Demeria Hollingsworth. She remembers Demeria as a smiling, happy girl who did well in school and always hugged her mom and her little sister. She liked to read books, go swimming, play outside, ride her bike every day, play with the kids in the neighborhood, play with her friends' kids, and was really sweet. Brianna, her mom, states that the girls were staying with their grandmother in Humboldt for the summer, and this is where the girls began to fight and argue over an iPhone. Brianna deeply wishes that she would have just gone up there to her mom's house to pick up Demeria as soon as she heard that they had been fighting and arguing over an iPhone, but she believed that they were having a fun summer up there, and she definitely did not think that her 12-year-old niece would kill her baby. Brianna also states that the last time she saw her baby, she was smiling, giving her kisses, and telling her that she will see me when it's time to come back home. But she is never coming back home now, which is just so heartbreaking. I can't imagine the pain that Brianna is going through for losing her 8-year-old baby girl. A GoFundMe was set up to help Brianna pay for Demeria's funeral expense, and I have linked that in the description below if you're interested in donating anything to help the poor grieving mother. I consider this to be one of the most disturbing violent acts committed by either an adult or juvenile that my office has prosecuted, states Frederick H. Agee, the District Attorney General for the state's 18th Judicial District. Due to the incredibly horrendous nature of this crime, and under Tennessee law, the juvenile court loses jurisdiction after a juvenile turns 19, so therefore the juvenile would be free from any further detention, supervision, or court-ordered mental health treatment. The office is petitioning Juvenile Judge Mark Johnson to transfer the delinquent child to circuit court to be tried as an adult. Under the law, the move would allow for a lengthier sentence, whether that is through incarceration or a supervised release. It's honestly scary to me how addicting an iPhone or an iPad can be to younger kids and even adults. It's really hard for me to put myself in the shoes of this mother because I do not have children, but it does remind me of when I was a child and I would have sleepovers with my cousins, my younger cousins, and we would argue over like Bratz dolls and things like that, but I just cannot imagine doing any kind of harm to my younger cousin over a toy or a game. And it just really, to me, shines a light on how addicting iPhones and like TikTok and iPads are to children these days. It's very, very scary. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. If you want to hear more by me, please click the subscribe button below, and it would help me out a lot if you could give my like button a hug and a pat on the head. Thank you for listening, and that's all for now.